Welcome to Abstract Illusions Radio with host Jennifer Hillman. The show explores and reveals the human potential through creativity. So enjoy the show to create a life you love.
Hello everyone, this is Jennifer Hillman and welcome to Abstract Illusions Radio. Today we have a very special guest. He is, I think, the authority on astrology, mythology, and symbols relating to living through humanity at the highest level. Monty Taylor can be found at montytaylor.com. He is also the radio host on talkingalternatively.com, and his show is Consciously Living, or Living Consciously.
Living Consciously, yes. At talkingalternative.com.
So thank you so much for being on the show. It's coming to the end of the year and a new year starting, and astrology is a good way to kind of get a heads up on the best way to expand your journey in a really beautiful adventure and really understand the stepping stones along the way through the mythology of astrology and the psychological parts that interplay with it. So I definitely wanted to have you on to help us all, because you really are quite the authority on this. I've been listening to your show for a few years now. As soon as I found out, I will turn it on, and it's just like I learn something every time.
Well, thank you for the compliment, Jennifer. I hope to be of help.
You definitely are. So how can people use astrology for self-actualization, to really open up using it in a way that's just more than what's happening to them, so they kind of embrace it, to use it as a tool to really expand themselves?
Well, thank you. That's a great question, Jennifer. The first thing I like to try to do with people with a question about how astrology works is to really emphasize it is not fate. Astrology and your astrological chart, if you cast a chart for the beginning of anything, the birth of a baby, the starting of a company, a marriage, a first date, anything that has a beginning can have an astrological chart. And what that chart is actually, it's called a horoscope, and in Greek that means picture of the hour. It's a picture of the sky the moment you were born, or the moment you began a new job or whatever. And it has information about the wiring of the time cycles, about what goes on. Now, we express a lot of this through symbolic poetic language that we call mythology. But I like to make it very practical and tell people that your astrological chart should be looked at the way you would look at an MRI or an X-ray, if you will. It doesn't cause what it reveals. And people put the chicken before the egg, or the egg before the chicken, whichever it's supposed to be. If you have certain things in your astrological chart, that's revealing natural tendencies that you have. It's the way the universe works through you, and I tell everyone, yes, the universe wants to work for you, but it really wants to work through you, and your job is to get out of the way. So it's like saying, if your MRI or your DNA says that you are a Swedish person with very, very pale skin, pale blue eyes, and light hair, I wouldn't advise you to go out in the sun without sunscreen. Now, that's not fate. That's just what is. And so when you look at the birth of a country, a corporation, a person, you can see that this person is going to have cycles of energy that affect them, just the way the weather affects you. So, quite simply, right now we're going through some great changes in the chart of the United States and in the chart of certain time periods of history. So that's basically what I like people to understand. And then when you start understanding your mythology, you understand that it is really a general message that is trying to express itself through this poetic language. Because remember, people were not literate. They didn't have books and textbooks to read. They learned through symbol. And that's what the great psychologist Carl Jung is trying to bring to everyone. Uh, he really did decode for us how the human psyche and the unconscious relates first and foremost to symbols. I tell everyone that's why um, astrological charts are written in symbols. They're not written in words. You have symbols for the planets, not words.
Hmm.
Because when you're reading symbols, you're using the right hemisphere of the brain. And that is the part of the brain designed to solve problems. Your left brain is, yes, it's logical, it's linear, it's deductive, it's very scientific, it's very efficient, but it's designed to diagnose a problem, not solve it. It is the balance of the two, and that's what a good astrological reading can give you, is your own balance of your ability to visualize and your ability to interpret the visualization. That's why we wake up after a serious dream and we have the answer to a problem. Does that sort of outline it the way your listeners would like to approach it?
Yes, yes, it really does. And um, the symbols are really, in many ways, very easy to understand. It's just a lot of people, it takes time for them to really, because they're in a chart, there are so many parts to it.
Right.
I mean, you've got your natal charts, but you also got the houses, which can be totally different. And to the interplay of both of those to balance the whole picture, I think can be confusing to some people.
Yes, it takes a little time to learn the language of astrology, and the language is just a way of thinking. But you're right, a chart is comprised of three things: planets, which are explained by mythologies. For example, Mercury is the planet associated with logical linear thinking and curiosity and research. When Mercury is going retrograde, your logical linear thinking is sometimes on a little different footing than normal. And they call Mercury in mythology the trickster, because when Mercury is retrograde and we have a lot of confusion, Mercury is not causing the confusion. Mercury is bringing up to your awareness the fact that your logical, linear, routine thinking is not a one size fits all kind of phenomena. And we very often fool ourselves with what we think we know when Mercury is retrograde. And Mercury spends as much time every year retrograde as the human body spends sleeping. So, can you imagine if you never slept? You'd go insane. So Mercury retrograde, 3.5 weeks at a time, 3 times a year, adds up to the same number of hours the human body spends sleeping over the period of a year. And it is a time to reflect on things. That's the whole purpose of it. And when it's acting up on you, and you're misunderstanding things or not following through and double checking the details, and you can have a problem, it teaches you a way to prevent future problems.
Yes, it does. Okay, so you got the planets. What's the next part?
Well, if you look at planets like you would look at an actor on the stage, okay,
Mm-hmm.
the actor has to be in an environment. So I don't think we would do Shakespearean Hamlet with the background of scenery from Hawaii. It wouldn't make any sense. So the sign that a planet is in is the environment The planet will always play the role it's supposed to play and do the job it's supposed to do. But it will have to be adaptable to the conditions of the sign that it is in. And remember, every sign has a natural ruler.
Mm-hmm.
For example, today Mercury is in Sagittarius. For a baby born today with Mercury in Sagittarius, Sagittarius is internationalism, the higher mind, higher academics, it's university study, it's the curiosity of foreign travel, but it's also cosmopolitan living. And on the other side, it's also associated with the wilderness, with the wilds of the woods, with the trolls and the elves and the fairies and all of the things that nature can teach you. So the thinking process of a person with Mercury in Sagittarius is going to express itself in some of those ways. If Mercury were in the sign of Virgo or Capricorn, those are environments that are very structured. These are the signs that are conducive to accounting, to logical linear outlines of things, not to spontaneity and exploration to get your information. This is pre-planning and research. Two different styles of thinking. Does that explain it?
Oh, most definitely. And
Hmm. And then the next thing you have in a chart are houses. There are 12 of them. They're simply, if your astrological chart looks like a great big pizza cut up into 12 slices, well, maybe you have 5 planets in one sign, and maybe that sign covers one house. So that house is going to be very dominant for you. For example, people with 4 or 5 planets in the 10th house of career are going to be career oriented people. They're going to have a mission to their lives. They're not going to be passive. They're not going to find that the most important thing to do is plan their next vacation. And consequently, if people have 3 or 4 or 5 planets in the 4th house, the polarity opposite side of the chart, that's the house of family, heritage, museums, real estate, home. These people are trying to make a connection to a tribe, a clan, a piece of geography, a town, an area. They are looking for some emotional roots through which they learn how to express the lessons of their lives. Whereas someone with it in the 10th house, they're going to be much more at home in the office or in the skyscraper, in the big city, or on the airplane.
now, if, because I know a little bit about astrology, isn't the sixth house the house of service? So they would be very work oriented or service oriented.
Yes, every house has some convenient names, and one of the original and oldest names of the 6th house is the perfection of self through service to others. The 6th house therefore rules health, and by association, it rules nursing, it rules nutrition, it rules taking what you have in front of you and put it into order so that you can use it in an integrated, non-confusing factor. So, Virgo is the natural ruler of the 6th house. And what you say about the 6th house, you can say about the sign Virgo. But what if you have Sagittarius on your 6th house? Your service will have an overlay of values that are Sagittarian. So your health will involve higher education, studying international things, finding alternative healing methods, herbology, aromatherapies, all kinds of things from different cultures. You would try not to let that be unattainable or just foreign to you. You would try to make it integrate into your present day understanding. If you have Aquarius there, that's the sign of the innovative inventor. You're going to look for new ways to be of service. You're going to find a way to be of service probably on the internet or through technology. Or if you are working in health, You might come up with some wonderful apps and computer programs to help you understand food combining or nutrition. You see how we start blending them? That's the
Yes,
way astrology works. It's organic, not mechanical.
most definitely. So, how would you use a basic chart to really explain? I mean, if the person has like empty houses, how does that influence their chart?
Well, every astrologer has its own personal opinions about things. Usually they're based on a long line of experience. I've done astrology 47 years. But what I would like to say about that is that an empty house in a chart, quite simply, from my experience, says don't worry about that part of your life. It will take care of itself if and only if you take care of the houses and signs where you have a lot of planets. And if you are conscious and aware of how those planets are affecting each other, are they supporting each other? Are they challenging each other? Are they neutral? So, a lot of people, let's say, for example, someone has an empty fifth house of dating and romance. Well, if they work on their house that has a lot of planets in family, and maybe a lot of planets in career, and maybe a lot of planets in education, if they plan that, they're going to sort of have a better understanding of who they are so that they can have a relationship. Because if you don't know who you are, how can the other person know who you are?
Exactly. Now,
Hmm?
I have always thought of squares and oppositions as the aspects to really, it's kind of funny.
Unevolved levels of all aspects. And opposition doesn't mean conflict. It's like two children sitting on a seesaw trying to give each other a good time by taking turns. And opposition are two planets, or signs, or houses, because they're opposite each other. They're seeking integration through balance. But if you try to give preference to one side and ignore the other, then you're going to have an inner war going on of competition within yourself, let's say between family, home, and career, which is the opposite side.
Right.
Or let's say the 11th house is the house where you want to be independent and free. And the opposite side of that is the sign of creativity and romance and dating. Wow, some people like to play the field and they have a challenge with romance. So always, and a square is another one. Everyone looks at the square as a problem, as a challenge. Well, yes, if you're not balancing the two members of the square, 90-degree angle, it's like a wall, vertical, and a car smashing into the wall from a 90-degree direction on the road. But if you just look at that same 90 degrees, that can be a wall supporting a ceiling above it. And the angle again is 90 degrees. So all aspects have a positive or negative side depending on the level of consciousness of the person dealing with the transit of the square or the opposition, or sometimes it's permanent in their natal chart. Does that clarify it?
Yes, but let me ask you, what if you have a square and your sun is squaring your moon?
Yeah.
What would be the balancing act with that?
Well, there's a challenge there. Squares are always challenges, and if you use them right, they can be the angle of manifestation. That's the positive side of a square. It is either the angle of challenge or it is the angle of manifestation. If you don't have any squares in your chart, you can't build anything. It's just like not having any walls and ceiling in your house. You're just putting things in nice triangles. In fact, here's a very good idea about how to think about a square. A square is an angle of 90 degrees. Okay, all the Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts know when you go camping that if you want to start a fire, you rub two sticks together at an angle of 90 degrees, a square. And if you rub long enough and hard enough, you'll get some sparks and you can start your campfire. Now, a trine is a beautiful, harmonious flow of energy without any friction. And if you rub two sticks together at an angle of a trine, which is 120 degrees, you can rub those sticks together all day long and you're not going to get anything. Does that sort of show you
Yes.
square?
Yes.
Now, if you say the sun and the moon, people with the sun squaring the moon, or vice versa, permanently in their natal chart, these people usually have a challenge between their awareness, their consciousness, and their conscious thinking, and their emotions and their intuition. They are usually challenging each other. And these people are challenged to let the conscious mind learn how to be the interpreter for the unconscious mind instead of fighting each other. Also, it's a very high statistical probability that if you have a square between the sun and the moon in your natal chart, very often, it doesn't cause it and make it happen, but very often, statistically, these people will find that while their mother was pregnant with them, there was a lot of stress in the marriage between the mother and the father.
I'll have to check that out.
And it doesn't have to be emotional conflict. It can be, let's say, maybe the father was away in the armed forces and the mother had to fend for herself.
Right.
You see, it could be anything like that, but there was a challenge between the parents while the mother was carrying the child. Very, very common.
That's very interesting. Um, with challenges in your chart, I always think of them life lessons. And once you learn it and you rise above those, things balance out and things will go much easier for you. Is that a good way of thinking of it?
I think it's an ideal way of thinking of it, but I'll give you one little caveat or warning about it. The
Okay.
universe, as soon as the a planet goes around and activates that square again later on, it'll give you the same test in disguise to
Oh,
make sure
yes.
you learn the lesson.
Oh, yes. I know that well.
Yeah. We learn emotional lessons quite frequently. We have to, because if we learned them few and far between, they'd be so dramatic we couldn't handle them. So we every month the moon is going to square your sun. Every month the moon is going to square your Mars. Every month the moon is going to square your Venus. And you can just smoothly fly right through that if you've sort of gotten a good understanding of yourself, and you'll start recognizing stereotypical characters in your life a mile away, saying, "Oh, I know what this one means."
Yes. And I always say there's like 360 perspectives to every lesson. So there's
Good way to put
360
it,
way
Jennifer.
to learn it, and you're always going to be learning something from a situation from a different perspective, from a different level, and it's just expanding yourself to a greater understanding of everything around you. So once I figured that one out, it made things a lot easier when those little tests come back around. Um,
Yes. Hmm.
so it's now a chart, as you said, can be any situation. So
Yes.
you can have an individual, then you can have like a couple has their own chart um,
Right.
of their own lessons that they're learning together. Um, and same with, as you mentioned, the U.S. has a chart, and right now there's a lot of activity in the U.S. chart.
Yes. Yes. There is. And it depends on which chart you use. You see, how can you really give the right chart for a country like the US, founded in the 18th century? Okay, so we celebrate the birthday as the Declaration of Independence.
Right.
Don't forget that that was 5:35 in the morning. And do you really do it as to when the Declaration of Independence was written, or when it was signed? Or when was it received in England? By ship, no less. Or is the birth chart of the United States the First Continental Congress? Or is the birth chart of the United States the adoption of the Articles of Confederation, which were the first governing body document before the Constitution? There's a lot of things to look at, so you have to compare them. I tell everyone, you have to look at the big picture of something, even in your own life. If
Right.
you're over 35 years old, you have 19 different versions of your chart fully active, interrelating with each other.
Wow. I did not realize that.
Yes, and you have something called a progressed chart. That's a very important kind of chart. It's not your birthday chart. It is the chart that is mathematically progressed. 1 degree in the zodiac for every year you have been alive. And you progress mathematically the chart, and you will get a chart reflecting, well, let's put it this way, your natal chart when you were a baby,
Hmm.
the seed of a tree. And the progress chart, if you're 40 years old, let's say, you are seeing what the tree has grown into after 40 years. And I tell everyone, especially when I'm working with very challenging, cases with my private practice, if you are asking all of your questions, all of them, just from your natal chart that you were born with, that is equivalent to putting your baby picture on your passport.
Well,
You
it's,
get it? You're
yeah.
still the same person. However, you've had an awful lot of experience that has modified the way that tree has been growing. Mhm.
So,
So when I do a chart for a client, I put their natal chart. I do a tri-wheel, which is 3 concentric charts. First, I put the natal chart in the middle, and then I put the progressed chart around the natal chart. So, for example, your progressed sun might be trining your natal moon. That wasn't true when you were born, but it is now. So if you are, for example, born, as you said, with sun square the moon,
right.
well, in your late 20s, your uh, progressed sun is going to be trining your natal moon. Isn't that interesting? And then
Yes.
around the center natal chart, and then around that, the progressed chart, I put a third wheel, which is the chart where planets are today, the transit chart, the current transits of today. So, how is your relationship of your original life plan, your birth chart, and the relationship of that to the chart for the age you are now being activated by today's transits? Then you start getting a little bit of high definition television.
I would say so.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, do you think people should be more looking at their progress chart if they're
Well, it depends
trying
on
to?
their age. If they're 7 years old, I wouldn't worry about it, or even 17 for that matter.
But
But if they're 45 or 50 or 35 even, I would say it's very insightful because your progressed moon may have changed signs since you were born. That's
very
important
true.
to know.
That's very true. Um,
Hmm? So,
does
for example, when I was born, my natal sun, my conscious sense of self,
hmm
was in the sign of Cancer. Now, you don't ever lose that natal chart. You have to blend it with progress chart. And my progressed sun is now in the sign of Libra, you see, which is, diplomacy, problem solving, being an advocate for things, seeking out balance. I work on behalf of a lot of artists, like one
hmm
who's on your show quite frequently, Jason Potvin,
yes.
an absolute brilliant artist who can teach you volumes about yourself through one of his abstract paintings. Not because it's just a little brain teaser, because there's deep emotional commitment to what he's doing. It's not just a little experiment. See, there's depth there.
And the same with his music as well.
Yes, indeed. You see, very interesting. So you see, the planet that rules Neptune, which rules the inspiration, not the technique, for painting and music, Neptune, is now in a very prominent part of Jason's chart now. So he's in a middle section of his life where his life mission is being expressed through the mythology of Neptune, which is higher consciousness, transcendental spirituality, and artistic inspiration.
Now, was Neptune always really based with Pisces? Or how am I getting the feeling that Sagittarius was somehow related to Neptune?
Well, I think what you're intuitively picking up.
Oh, it's the Pisces I'm picking up. Is
Well,
the
here's what you're picking. When you mean when you're talking about Jason?
I just overall. I mean,
Overall,
Jason,
okay, well, here's a
Jason
good
as
insight.
well.
You said a very good question. There are two planetary rulers to the sign of Pisces. Before Neptune was actually discovered, the ruler of Pisces was Jupiter,
Jupiter.
still the ruling planet of Sagittarius. And then in 1843, when Neptune was actually discovered, and after astrologers worked with it for a couple of decades, they started associating Neptune with Pisces. So Pisces, along with several other signs, has two rulers. The original, which is Jupiter, and the contemporary, which is Neptune. So you're picking up the Neptune through your Jupiter Sagittarian sun,
Okay.
because it's the former ruler of Pisces.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. And
Make sense?
yes, and is Jason progressively Sagittarius now?
You see, Jupiter and Uranus and Pluto, these are outer planets. They're so far away from the Earth that in a human being's progress chart, they don't usually progress more than 3 or 4 degrees throughout their entire life because they progress so slowly, because they're so far away. So he still has the consistent Jupiter, Neptune in his natal chart where they are. But now, because other planets have moved, they're making different aspects now and are activating perhaps more strongly his Neptune and his Jupiter.
Plus, with Taurus, his work is also becoming more grounded.
Yes, he's a visionary. And that's challenging when you're trying to live in a linear world. So he brings his gift of inspiration and he's grounding it so people can relate to it better. That's what Venus is all about, relating. You see, Mercury is communication, but Venus is relating. And if you look at society, we communicate very often without relating. And more than that, when people fall in love romantically, they relate, but they don't communicate.
Exactly.
So it's always a balance.
It truly is. Now, with the outer planets, I mean, right now with Uranus and Aries, there's a lot of spontaneity
Yes.
with that energy. And it is that the planet that's going direct at the end of December?
Yes, it's the day after Christmas, December 26th.
Yay! And it's been a while since all the planets have been going direct as it's heading.
Yes.
So we have a breath of fresh air in a way because there's been so many people that I've talked to about this year that's saying, okay, I need a breather. This has been really intense.
Well, because too much was happening all at once. I mean, on January 7th, you're going to have Mercury going retrograde again, so you'll have another retrograde. But it'll be a time of reflection. You see, when a planet, and all the planets go retrograde except for the sun and the moon. And the trick is, if you're not an astrologer, just say, okay, this planet's retrograde, put the prefix re in front of any word. Mercury retrograde. So you're supposed to reflect, reconsider, reorganize, research, anything that begins with re. Same thing if Venus is retrograde. You should be rethinking and researching about your relationships. If Jupiter is going retrograde, you should be researching and rethinking your higher education, your higher mind, your desire for travel. If it's in Capricorn, you should be rethinking things about your career. Maybe you're in the wrong one.
And that is something that a lot of people are restructuring themselves because of Capricorn and the Pluto dancing right now.
Yes, Pluto is all about transformation. Pluto is renovation. Think about renovating a house. The first part of the renovation, which means to renew, is destruction. You have to knock down some walls, tear out some pipes, and it's a mess. You have to learn to live with plaster dust for a while. But if you keep on with the intent and the focus of the renovation, you eventually have something quite wonderful. Now, Pluto right now has been going for the last 6, 7, 8 years through the sign of Capricorn. Capricorn rules government and corporations and structures of anything and many more things. But can you see the way government and corporations are being absolutely mercilessly renovated? The wrecking ball is swinging fast and furious. So right now you can't tell the difference between the government and a corporation. The lobbying and the hidden wealth, plutocracy, is in the sign of government, rulership by the wealthy. It's going to go on until 2023. That's when it changes signs and goes into Aquarius. So people are seeing the structures of society being absolutely profoundly and totally renovated. And right now, all we're seeing is the destruction because the status quo will not work. And Pluto in Capricorn, Capricorn's ruled by Saturn, and Saturn is structure. And Pluto is non-negotiable transformation. So structures cannot stay in the status quo right now. So if you're trying to keep the good faith and hold on to what used to be back in the 80s, there's no way you're going to have a very comfortable life right now.
No.
But if you learn how, I tell everyone in my classes, what would you tell someone who's surfing the ocean if he wanted to control the wave he was riding? You have to learn to ride the wave.
Yeah.
That's where the mastery comes. Not in controlling the wave. That's impossible.
And just really understanding, and really, at least for me, yes, I am. I with Pluto and transformation.
Yeah.
As you were saying, right, the wave. It's like the more you resist it, it's going to persist, and it's going to be harder if you continue to resist. It's going to knock down the wall. You have it. You can make it a really easy way of doing it, or you can make it, really hard on yourself. So it's best just to breathe, kind of get the signs of where you're going. And I'm finding that a lot of times dreams are showing me the way.
Yes, that's Neptune. Neptune rules dreams, and the moon reflects them and helps you understand them. You see, the most important thing, and I'm not being a cockeyed optimist or a Pollyanna, planets never change anything that doesn't need changing. And they change them when they need changing. So, right now, we are having a massive assault on the economy because things got out of balance in the 90s with corporations and executives and the 1% of the wealthy owning all of the resources, the middle class collapsing, and the economy mutating. All right, why? Because we have to have all the individual countries become more flexible with their economies, including their currencies, so that a global integration of a new economy can take place. It can't take place if everybody is fighting everybody else. It has to suddenly find the common denominator. And you brought up Neptune and dreams. Neptune is in Pisces right now. Neptune has not been in Pisces for 165 years. Neptune and Pisces both rule oceans. And the temperature of our oceans is affecting climate change. Therefore, Neptune is very much involved in climate change for the next
Hmm.
14 years. And Neptune is also very concerned about the pollution. And Pluto is both pollution, but the positive side, it is sewage treatment and cleansing. So we have very seriously polluted oceans. That is affecting the fishing industry, it's affecting everything you can think of. And we have to do something about it. And the planetary transits are just going to be what they are. So if you're living in the Yukon and you have a blizzard, you'd better learn how to build an igloo.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. That's all it is. It helps our evolution.
And we all need it. The planet is going to be changing just as well as we are, and we need to, ride the wave and adjust. There is a lot of malleable signs that are very active right now, so you got to adapt to what's going on, or else it will just throw you down the ground and keep going.
Yes. And archetypes, which are characters that we make in mythology out of abstract principles that we can't see. For example, Neptune is associated with unconditional love. You can't see that. So you make a character out of it so you can put it into different situations and understand it and study it and communicate about it. But there's another sign right now in Pisces. There's another planet, Chiron, which isn't terribly well known. We've only been using Chiron in Western astrology since 1977. When we have a new level of consciousness developing in the human psyche, we will usually discover a new planet that can codify and integrate what we're evolving into. Chiron is a fascinating myth. He was the ultimate healer, and he teaches everyone that you can only heal a problem by going to a higher level of perception and a higher level of consciousness than you had when you noticed you had the problem.
And it's
He became, in fact, Sagittarius. You should like that.
well,
You
yes,
see, when he
I'm very.
ascended to get rid of an incurable wound, he said, I have to change frequency to heal this wound. Nothing on the material level is healing this wound. I have to do something of a higher perspective. He ascended into the sky and became renamed Sagittarius. And because he taught everyone archery when he was on Earth, and he said, archery is the principle of focusing on your goal, and when you become one with your goal or your target, you'll always hit it. But if you're looking at all the other factions all around it, you're never going to hit your goal because you'll be too scattered and refracted. And what I love right now is that only about 15 years ago did they discover the actual center of our galaxy that we're in. And the galactic center is in the sign of Sagittarius, and it's 28.55 degrees of Sagittarius. And that's right at the tip of the arrow of Sagittarius the Archer. So he's aiming towards the galactic center. We're coming into a more galactic, collective understanding of life and our role in it.
I'm 2 degrees away from the galactic center.
Well, that's why you have a show called Abstract Illusions.
Yes.
Abstract is Uranus, illusions is Neptune. Abstract illusions trigger your own psyche to blend the conscious and the intuitive so that you get an enlightenment and go through the higher galactic consciousness necessary to be able to understand how to be effective in the society we're living in.
And it came to me in a dream. The name actually came to me in a dream.
Mm-hmm.
So it's wonderful, and I have enjoyed using this program since 2007. So it has served me well. in
Yes,
expanding my knowledge and my perspective on so many things.
it's wonderful.
So
A
with
regular fan from now on.
thank you. Um, with Cryon
No,
being
Chiron.
Cryon. So
Chiron is a different archetype and he's not associated with astrology.
ah, okay. So the wounded healer within us all is really being activated for a lot of people these days.
Yes. And depending on what time of day and when you were born, it's in a different sign and house. So wherever you have Chiron, Chiron, make sure you're looking at the right archetype. Chiron is where we come into life with an Achilles heel. It's our sensitive spot. So if you have Chiron, for example, in the second house of self-worth, you'll have an Achilles heel or a wound there, and you'll be working very hard to go to a higher level of consciousness to develop self-worth.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Many people have Chiron in the 10th house of career. They can never seem to find the career because they're trying to fit into somebody else's structure, instead of understanding what gives me passion and relevance and fulfills me. Then they start attracting career opportunities. And maybe it's not what they went to college to do.
That would be me. No, mine is actually in the 12th house. So, um, it's it's very interesting because I've always kind of thought that meant kind of like mistrusting the universe in some sense.
No, it means the universe on an intuitive, higher conscious spiritual level is going to speak to you. Now, Chiron, every planet has two sides to it. If we say Chiron is where you have a wound or an Achilles heel, it's also the point in your chart where you play the role of Chiron as being the greatest healer on the planet. So when it comes to 12th house matters and Piscean, is it in? It's not in Pisces. What
Oh,
sign is
yes, it
your
is. It's in Pisces.
in Pisces?
Yep.
Natally?
Yes.
Okay, that tells me your age. Okay,
Yes. And that's fine.
so that's right. So you're having a Chiron return then right now, which means you're coming fully aware of your healing talents by taking people to a higher level of consciousness. That I'm quite confident I could say is the mission of your program, right?
Yes.
There you are. It happened. And Chiron didn't take you by the horns and force you to do it. It suddenly guided you until you saw through a higher perspective of the way you have lived your earthly life, how to take it up to higher meaning. And that's a wonderful thing. So Chiron in the 12th house now, at this age, you're not 12 years old anymore, is giving you the wisdom to apply your knowledge to a higher perspective. And therefore, you find things start shifting into a healing mode.
And it truly is. It
Mm-hmm.
it's the aspects overall for next year. Is there anything that people really need to be aware of that's really going to bring their consciousness to a new level?
Well, if they would stop trying to look at politics like a football game and start looking at it as the polarities of consciousness that are combating each other for dominance instead of balance, if you could only start balancing things, that's the number one thing that's going to really be forced on people. Really. Because if you don't try to balance what you think is an adversarial point of view with your own reality, we don't say you have to adapt it or cater to it, but we do have to understand it through balance and compassion. There will be enormous um, changes and mutations in the economy, in the currencies of the world this next year. But the outer planets, they work like a glacier. You know, you don't notice how a glacier is melting or progressing, whichever it's doing, until you look at time delayed photography. And you say, oh my goodness, look where this glacier was 10 years ago. I had no idea it had receded this much. You see? Because the outer planets, they work that way. You don't see the change on a daily basis. But you can see some of the climaxes that they produce because they will always address stuck energy. And so, an awful lot of stuck energy in terms of political, cultural, economic, religious, compassion, everything is going to be unstuck this year
Mm-hmm.
because they cannot. It's like the Earth gives you a perfect example of how it works. Tectonic plates deep below the Earth's surface are grinding against each other for decades, and suddenly you'll have the San Francisco earthquake, you see?
Mm-hmm.
That was not the result of something that was just 2 weeks old. That was the culmination of the release of energy that can no longer be sustained. And we are in for about 5 years of that. But especially this next year, because of the terrorism in the world, which is a reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And so, whenever you look at reactions, those are always unconscious. A reaction is unconscious, a response is conscious. So when you start looking at the how will I respond to the fact that so many people in the world are angry? How can I be a little beacon of peace while protecting myself? How can I not support movements? Look at the way people are right now being fanned into a mob mentality by reacting due to political leaders with a hidden personal agenda. And they realize what I'm doing is I'm trying to win a political battle. I'm not trying to help the planet become better.
Exactly. And the other side is there is a lot of people gathering for meditation to lift up the planet to a higher level to kind of ease all the fear base that's being thrown at us.
Seriously. One of the most astounding and moving things that I noticed this past week was all of the demonstrations were outlawed and forbidden in Paris because of the terrorist environment. But they are having also the global conference on climate change there. So they didn't want any demonstrations. And there was the picture in the Place de la Concorde, I believe, in Paris, of thousands and thousands and thousands of neatly placed pairs of empty shoes around the center of the plaza, demonstrating that people were there in spirit and the protest was going on energetically through group healing dynamic thought and meditation.
And that's beautiful. That's just in many ways exactly what needs to be done. I mean, the more we focus on love and compassion and understanding, the shifts and change will be a lot easier.
And it's easier to do for me. I find I help a lot of people when I say, in Jungian Astrologer, Carl Jung is one of my heroes. I make no apologies. Carl Jung started to unlock a lot of mysteries for us. But when you study astrology from a Jungian perspective, you come to the realization that love, especially unconditional love, is not an emotion any longer at this stage of the human evolution. It is a cosmic energy force. It is a force for creativity. So unconditional love doesn't mean that we have to go back into the Renaissance and become St. Francis of Assisi. What we have to do is saying the frequency of vibration, of harmony, of unconditional love is a universal creative force that we experience very often emotionally, but it is not a simple human emotion.
No, far from it. And it's as you were saying that I was thinking of Star Wars number one coming out now, and number two, the phrase that is probably most known from there is may the force be with you. It's almost saying, may
Yes,
may unconditional love be with you.
bingo. I totally applaud that interpretation. You're absolutely right.
So there's and it's beautiful and wonderful. Again, Monty, if you could repeat how people, if when they want a wonderful session from you, and I highly recommend it because you will learn very much about you on many, many levels,
Uh,
where can they go to find you?
Oh, how kind of you. Thank you. Just go to my email address, I think, which is Monty Taylor, Monty, Taylor, Taylor, and my lucky number, which is 22, Monty Taylor 22 at Gmail. Or you can simply go to montytaylor.com. That's my website. Ask any questions, and I can get back to you with what I can do for you, and we can arrange, if you're not in New York, we can arrange something by telephone or whatever. And do tune into my show, which is Living Consciously. The website is talkingalternative.com. Talkingalternative.com. And my show, Living Consciously, comes on live every Monday at 12 noon New York time. But it's on the archives, so you can listen to it 24/7 if you don't want to call in with a question and just listen to it on the archives. It's there for about 12 weeks after every show. And that's the best way to reach me.
And I really listened to the show. I learned so much every time I listen to it, and I listen to it often. I thank you again, Monty Taylor, for this lesson in living in this new reality that we are now creating and with balance, compassion, and understanding. You are a remarkable man, and I thank you again so much for being on Abstract Illusions.
I'm deeply honored, Jennifer, and congratulations on the wonderful gift you give us all with your program. Thanks, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Okay, thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
With that, this is Jennifer Hillman saying thank you so much for listening to AIR. Until next time, with each breath of air, we hope you gain new insights and information. Till next time, many blessings.
One tall snuck in my sister, sing teeth and sensual blisters.